Mr. Meyer, your first census was when?
1910, April 1910.
Well, how do you feel about doing all the climbing in the apartment houses?
Well, I tell you, I don't climb as fast as I used to. See, after 50 years, you slow down here, there, and everywhere.
Any other changes that you've seen?
Why, yes, there are changes. Years back, we used to take the horses and the cows, stables. We used to get paid for that. Today, we don't find any around. In fact, years back, I found where they kept the horse in the house. And I had to, I had to designate a number on another street where the horse was grazing so I could get a dime. We got 2.5 cents those years and 10 cents for a stable. And that dime I needed 50 years ago.
They kept the horse in the house. I gave the horse a fake address so I could get the dime because I otherwise wouldn't count as a stable. It had to be a house and a stable. The horse was right there in the house, but that was the late, great WNBC correspondent Gabe Pressman, my friend Gabe, interviewing a U.S. Census worker back in 1960. That employee, lamenting the fact that he no longer got paid for counting horses as part of his census work, whether they were in the house or in the stable. Not like the good old days back in 1910 when we got paid for counting the horses. Decades from now, when we are looking back on old news packages about this census, the 2020 census, one of the big takeaways will be about this census that the Trump administration tried to rejigger it. They tried to hotwire it, basically. They tried to turn this year's census into a political weapon by changing it in ways that would undercount Latinos and immigrants, which would undermine their voting power. Now, that effort by the Trump administration was, of course, stopped by the Supreme Court earlier this year, when the court, in part, upheld a lower court ruling from the Southern District of New York. That ruling had found that the Trump administration's decision to add a citizenship question to the census, to change the census, it was against the law, because the decision to add that question was, quote, arbitrary and capricious. Basically, the Trump administration decided they were going to change the census and add that question for their own reasons. Only later, they tried to shoehorn a false rationale onto it for why they needed to do it. The Supreme Court didn't buy it. Well, now a similar situation seems to be playing out at the U.S. Agriculture Department. For the past few weeks, we've been covering the way the Agriculture Department under President Trump has been trying to decimate science at that agency. Presumably because scientists at that agency keep producing work that has inconvenient scientific findings that this administration doesn't want to confront. Scientists at USDA were given a month to decide whether they would move halfway across the country for no good reason at all, or else be fired. About 2/3 of the scientists chose door B. Well, today, those employees started receiving their termination letters, telling them that they will officially be out of a job come the close of business on September 27th. The union representing the workers at USDA today announced that they have won a few concessions from the agency for employees who have decided to accept this forced transfer. But at this point, the move would seem to be a done deal, except for the fact that there are two important data points worth keeping an eye on here. The first is that on Monday, the USDA Inspector General released a report concluding that the agency didn't actually have the authority to pay for relocating the science departments without budgetary approval from Congress, which they absolutely do not have and will not get. People like Virginia Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton have been waving the flag on this point, calling into question the legality of the move. But then there's also this from the White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney.
You've heard about Drain the Swamp. What you probably haven't heard is what we're actually doing. I don't know if you saw the news the other day, but the USDA just tried to move, or did move, 2 offices out of Washington, D.C., I think to Kansas City, Missouri. Yes, you can applaud that one, because that's what we've been talking about doing. Guess what happened? Guess what happened? More than half the people quit. Now, it's nearly impossible to fire a federal worker. I know that because a lot of them work for me, and I've tried, and you can't do it. But by simply saying to people, you know what, we're going to take you outside the bubble, outside the Beltway, outside this liberal haven of Washington, D.C., and move you out into the real part of the country, and they quit. What a wonderful way to sort of streamline government and do what we haven't been able to do for a long time.
It's nearly impossible to fire a federal worker unless you pull a move like we just did. Isn't this awesome? They're all quitting. This is how we're going to get them to quit. You just said that out loud. Yeah. You got that big round of applause. You know what else you got? Throughout this relocation, the Agriculture Department has stressed that it only wanted to do this sort of thing because it had the best interests of its staff in mind. They want to improve USDA's ability to attract and retain highly qualified staff. They said the whole reason for moving was simply to move the federal workers closer to the farmers the agency serves. Also, they'd be saving money, an argument that has already been disproven. This is not saving money. But now, the White House chief of staff, trying to get a big round of applause at a conservative event, has let the cat out of the bag. They did this not because they wanted to do anything about retaining their staff, but because they wanted to make everybody quit by doing this in as onerous a way as possible. The question is, now that Mulvaney has made this admission, does this change anything? We have already seen the Trump administration get slapped down for making up bogus pretextual reasons to justify what is a bald-faced political move. Isn't that just absolutely exactly what's happening here as well?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.